Okay, perfect. We are at time to get started. I will let in the last few people that join us a little later. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you, Professor Fox, for being here. I will start with a quick introduction of myself and of you, and then hand it over to you. My name is Felina Fleck. I'm the Assistant Director of the Graduate International Programs Office here at San Diego. You can see our beautiful campus in my background. Very lucky to go here every day. And I'm mainly in charge of our LLM programs here at the School of Law, as well as our MSLS degree, which is a law degree for non-lawyers, to learn more about legal backgrounds of any topic that might benefit them. And we are super excited to host this free webinar and have our special guest, Professor Dov Fox, join us today. Professor Fox is director of the Center for Health, Law and Policy and Bioethics here at our University of San Diego School of Law. He's one of the nation's leading experts in health law and bioethics and has been recognized for both understanding scholarships and teaching excellence. Professor Fox is author of Birth, Rights, and Wrongs, also the title of today's webinar, and the upcoming The Conscience of Care. A really, really cool fun fact, I think, is that he also created the award-winning Audible series Donor 9623, which was named Audible's #1 podcast of 2020. And he's also featured in Harvard Law Review, New York Times, and NPR. We're very, very lucky to have you join us. I'll hand it off to you, Professor Fox, to take it from here as the expert on our subject today.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Feline, and thanks to you all for joining. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. Let me share my screen, and we will take it away. Today, we're going to be talking, as you know, about what happens when reproduction goes awry and what we should do about it when it happens. So our lifetimes have witnessed a reproductive revolution, one that has filled empty cribs, freed families from terrible diseases, and let people plan their lives around when they're ready to have kids. This is a real medicine of miracles. It includes everything from long-lasting reversible birth control implants to in vitro fertilization and genetic testing before deciding which of your embryos to implant to initiate a pregnancy, fetal screening early in a pregnancy that allows you to use just a simple blood test for a number of disorders that might inform where we still have abortion rights, where you want to make a choice to end a pregnancy. But lawmakers have focused so squarely on abortion since the Roe v. Wade decision came down in 1973 that these subsequent developments have gone really unpoliced by lawmakers. Reproductive medicine has been too scared, or rather, lawmakers have been too scared to regulate reproductive medicine in other areas for fear of disrupting the balance of abortion rights and opposition that took prominence. And when an industry and a medical practice polices itself, things can go wrong. Some mix-ups rob people of the ability to reproduce. So here's an example. Infertile and same-sex couples who want to have a genetically related child trust fertility clinics with their dreams for biological parenthood.
The incident at Pacific Fertility Center in San Francisco happened on the same day as University Hospitals in Cleveland. The level of liquid nitrogen in a cryo storage tank used to preserve eggs and embryos dropped, raising the temperature in the tank and putting the eggs and embryos at risk.
other kinds of mishaps frustrate people's efforts not to have kids. So these include a range of mistakes like botched vasectomies or failed abortions. In 2015, over 100 women found themselves pregnant when it turns out their birth control pills were packaged wrong.
For generations, women have relied on the pill to avoid pregnancy. But a new lawsuit says 8 brands of birth control pills failed, putting 113 women in danger of unintended pregnancies because the pills were defectively and dangerously designed, manufactured, packaged, sold, and distributed. The defendants, Endo Pharmaceuticals of Ireland and its subsidiary Qualitest, based in Pennsylvania. The suit alleges the pills were packaged upside down, reversing the order. So the placebo pills were taken at the start of the women's 28-day cycle rather than the end. And that left the women without adequate contraception and at risk for unwanted pregnancy.
A third kind of case, these first two real quick to review, have left people without the child they wanted, with the child they didn't, and finally, with a different kind of child than one that they had been led to believe they would have and had a good reason to believe that. Here's an example. This, and we're going to come back to this case later, just for reference. This is a sperm bank catalog profile for an all-time popular sperm donor. The profile here that were put before parents, this is just the front page of a 27-page profile to select a sperm donor when they, as single women or infertile different sex couples or same-sex couples, were looking to pick a donor. It describes a 6'4" Tom Cruise lookalike with the IQ of Einstein. He was a neuroscience engineering PhD, an internationally acclaimed drummer who played 6 sports, spoke 5 languages, and loved his mama. Scores of families from all over the world paid thousands of dollars for samples from this man who the sperm bank called the perfect donor, until his ID got leaked and the truth came out. Turned out he dropped out of college his freshman year and was convicted of felony burglary amidst a history of struggles with serious mental illness that led him bouncing between psychiatric hospitals, prison, and the streets. Now, when victims in all kinds of these cases, when they take the sperm bank, the birth control manufacturer, the fertility clinic to court, and they try to say, hey, there was misconduct here and I was harmed, these cases are all dismissed. Seems like something was obviously wrong, seems like people were clearly harmed, and yet nothing quite fits for a range of reasons that we're going to get into in just a bit. For now, suffice to say that the Tennessee Supreme Court summed up the legal state of affairs for these cases when it declared simply the law does not recognize the disruption of family planning either as an independent cause of action to get you in the courthouse doors or as an element of damages that would provide you a right to remedy for such misconduct. So there are 3 buckets of these wrongs that we've considered so far. You might describe them like this. Some leave people with no baby, some leave them with a baby or any baby, and some leave people with a particular kind of baby. Let's unpack all 3, starting with the no baby cases, what these look like and what the problems are when victims of misconduct bring suit. So these no baby cases take arise in a vast number of fact patterns. So examples include the clinic, the fertility clinic you went to accidentally implants your embryos, maybe your last remaining embryos that you created in a petri dish, saved in a freezer, into someone else instead, a different fertility patient. Or a pharmacist swaps your prenatal vitamins with abortion pills. Or a doctor tells you that your wanted pregnancy would risk your life if you continue it when it wouldn't have, leading you to have an abortion you wouldn't have wanted under the true state of medical affairs. These are all real cases. They happen lots more like them. And when plaintiffs are deprived of procreation in these ways, they take the negligent professionals to court, and they almost always lose for a few common reasons. One, the reproductive professional, the OBGYN, the fertility clinic, the birth control manufacturer, never promised that you'd be able to take a baby home. They also say these losses are the emotional kind that doesn't provide a remedy on its own apart from more tangible harms related directly to your body or your bank account. For people who wanted to have a baby and couldn't, judges say that wrongdoing didn't leave them any more childless than they were before. Now, when procreation is imposed on people, courts face a different set of challenges, but in the court. So these cases include doctors' box of vasectomy, leave tubes untied when they were supposed to, or contraceptive rings and packages don't work the right way. In these cases, judges are suspicious that plaintiffs who end up with a baby are just trying to make someone else pay for their own reproductive negligence, like I forgot a condom or I didn't put it on the right way. And they say that you can't really have wanted to avoid pregnancy or a baby if you could have opted for abortion or adoption once you got pregnant or gave birth. Besides, courts say, once you hold a baby in your arms, how could you not appreciate that baby as something good for your life, a blessing that makes your life only better, even if that wasn't your plan? Courts say that loving the kid that you got means that you weren't really injured when procreation was negligently imposed upon you. You have a kid? Yeah. Do you love your child? Yeah. Well, that may not have been what your plan was, but now you're better off. Almost like I unsuspectingly throw a bag of heavy gold bars, bruising you. But come on, now you got a whole ton of money, right? Weren't you left better off, notwithstanding the thing you didn't ask for and didn't want up front? So that's the problem in these cases of procreation imposed. All but 4 states ban suits for wrongful life. These are brought by a child. They say, child can't sue for their very existence. The fact that they're existing, that they're born, that they're here, has to be better off than the alternative of them never having existed at all. Same with the 24 states that ban wrongful birth suits, the very same brought by the parents, basically alleging medical malpractice, but suing because you got a baby that you now have and ostensibly love or are supposed to love. All right, third kind of case. This is a particular baby cases. These involve procreation being confounded. It involves things like a donor switch or an embryo misdiagnosis that gives people a baby who's different than the one that they'd hoped to have. Here, too, courts deny a remedy to plaintiffs in court. They say that if they recognized their complaint for procreation confounded, they got a different kind of baby than they had wanted, that would send an intolerable message. It would say that the parents wish their own child a child like the one that they got had never been born. Or related, that some people like your child with your child's condition, are too genetically defective, too defective as people down to their very DNA to justify their very existence, to justify you loving them or them being in the world. Here are a couple of quotes. They say, quote, "We are unwilling to say that life, even life with severe impairments, may ever amount to a legal injury, and we bar these claims accordingly as no less than eugenic." Another quote, "If we were to accept that the birth of one child should have been prevented, it's a very short step to accepting that births of whole classes of children, anybody like this, should be similarly prevented." Courts that are willing even to move beyond these policy objections and even consider entertaining grievances insist that the damages for these harms would be too speculative anyway. They say basically that it's impossible to measure these kinds of reproductive losses in monetary terms, that even if you could, trying to put a price tag on the life of a child or how a child's smile weighs up against the burden of changing diapers or having a child who's very sick, it's just unseemly for parents to complain and for courts to get involved in the business of trying to weigh up the goods or bads of a child's role in a parent's life. All right, so this leads us to revisit that case of donor 9623 by way of brief refresher.
This guy on paper spoke 5 languages, working on a PhD in neuroscience engineering, IQ of 160.
What you thought you were getting, you were not getting. He allegedly fathered at least 36 children.
Who was this guy, and what drove him to do what he did?
I don't know if he had a messiah complex.
I turned just to look at him, and when I did that, it triggered something, and he kind of stormed at me.
This story, it's not just about this one guy or this one case. It's about a whole industry that creates millions of babies all around the world.
They're going to win the game of life by spreading their seed.
Who do they think they are by hiding all this stuff?
What was your donor number?
I think it was 9623.
So as it turns out, in the wake of Roe v. Wade and the squirmishness about regulating assisted reproduction, there was no regulating them in the way that we do normal medical practices, where the government might prescribe funds for research in this area, and then in turn, they can impose some ethical or legal limits on the way that it's used, or have some kind of oversight on licensing and what happens. Sperm banks are accordingly allowed to keep donor IDs secret so that parents can't vet them on their own. College-age men are promised an easy, anonymous way to trade in their ramen noodles for steak dinners. No background checks, no testing for genetic disorders, no tracking how many births come from each individual donor. And in the case of donor 9623, there were scores. Minimum is 36. More likely, closer to 100. In some cases, not this one, but others, over 1,000 biological children from just one man.
How do I know I'm getting quality? Don't worry. Our donors have to pass a rigorous screening process.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. What a beautiful little girl.
All right, these dots on the map are all the places that that donor 9623 children were born in. We're talking 6 countries, 3 continents, and most states in the US. You know, a problem in this case, because lots of the families sued, is that they couldn't prove that his genes were to blame for the problems that they were seeing in their children, including early onset psychosis and a range of mental health issues that were related seemingly to the higher risks that his diagnosis with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other related conditions passed on a higher risk for them to have. But on the other hand, hundreds of mutations are linked to schizophrenia, not just one or any known bundle, and lots of other factors contribute anyway. Things like pregnancy complications, childhood stress, drug use, things that aren't included in the DNA that a biological parent passes down to their kids. But all this, we'll see a bit. This is one family and how they had struggled with some of this.
Rage started early, collapsing on the floor in kindergarten, not responding to anyone, screaming fits in first grade with signs of bipolar disorder, disappearing into the woods in third grade.
And then we found on his phone that he was searching how to kill myself and how to kill my perfect stepbrother.
It wouldn't be until March of 2017 that Wendy Norman would discover her 15-year-old's behavioral and mental issues likely tied back to his birth and sperm donor number 9623.
For me, I'm scared. How do I help my son?
I think all this about the causation and the different factors that play in and make it hard to prove that causal link between genes and the kind of symptoms here that you're hearing about that a number of the families were dealing with. I think under all this, I think lies a much, much deeper question. And that's whether families should be able to count on health and safety in the children they create the way we count on that in the cars we drive or the food we eat. Or alternatively, is making babies just a crapshoot, however you do it. And how can parents rightfully complain when the very misrepresentations that led them to pick this donor is the only reason that they got their child instead of a completely different one? The alternative was never for their genetically unique individual child to have been born healthier or with fewer risks. The alternative was for their child never to have existed at all, never to have been conceived, and an altogether different child that was the combination of different sperm with egg would have existed in his or her place. So that frustrates the way that our legal system in the US thinks about a legally cognizable harm as an intervening misconduct before which you were better off, after which you were worse off. If it hadn't happened, you would have been better off than otherwise, if not for the misconduct. But here, if not for the sperm bank's failure to screen donors better, the child they got just would never have been. Now, courts in this case called what Zytex, this is the sperm bank that sold donor 9623's sperm for a pretty penny. They made the most money. Over 15 years they sold his samples all over the world. Now the courts called all those failures to screen, to check, to even Google him. All this was publicly available information. They called that failure reckless, reprehensible, and repugnant. But they said that letting the parents sue would send that intolerable message. I wish my own child had never been born. After the podcast, that was the audio sound you heard from, came out. Case got to the Georgia Supreme Court, and they revisited this question on appeal after that. Here's a nugget from the oral arguments. They happened over Zoom. This was during the pandemic.
Just to be clear what you're asserting, a sperm bank can completely misrepresent everything about the sperm it's selling and charge whatever amount of money based on those representations and completely lie to every customer it has, and nobody can do a thing about it.
8 months later, the court released its opinion on the case, ruling families can sue sperm banks for consumer fraud if they lie about their donors.
So why isn't that a beautiful compromise? Well, denying claims for wrongful birth, as the Georgia Supreme Court said, we don't allow that. We don't allow, in other words, suits that have the form of the very thing you're complaining about, the lack of information, the misrepresentation, the switch, and so forth, gave you the child that you now have. That had it not been for the misconduct you're complaining about, you wouldn't have had your child in the first place. It would have been a different child. You would have had no child. And the things that they allowed for, and that denies claims for wrongful interference or anything related to the medical expenses that accompany an early onset diagnosis or risks for mental illness, allowing for claims like consumer fraud, medical misrepresentation. Not only the damage is much smaller, more cramped and narrow, they don't really speak to the nature of the harm that happened. Those are kind of tightly around, well, there was some lie or false advertising or something like that, but not about the result, the consequence, what that means. Moreover, saying that the parents could sue for false advertising and consumer fraud treats donor selection like shopping for a product. And that gets at a word that looms over the whole story: eugenics. American sperm banking started in that era, the reproductive revolution, post-Roe that we opened with, 1980s. It had the explicit mission of mass breeding genius kids to combat hordes of stupid people from degrading the human gene pool, especially Americans. This is the founder of the Repository for Germinal Choice, otherwise known as the Nobel Sperm Bank. He collected samples from only the most vigorous, the most brilliant men. Here was his plan.
A donor to the repository has to be, first of all, almost perfectly healthy. Health is the most valuable heritable trait. Runner-up in importance is intelligence. So our donors ought to be very bright. As a matter of fact, all but one or two have an IQ of better than 130.
So you can see that eugenics was kind of behind where all this started at any rate. Modern sperm banks, of course, distance themselves from this early eugenic vision. They say, listen, we're not trying to design, perfect babies, engineer their traits from super sperm. We're just trying to give customers whatever they want. And we're just trying to meet consumer preferences, as it were. These parents or patients, whatever they want, we try to give them. If they want stupid kids, then we try to give them stupid kids. They want short kids, we give them short kids. What they say they want: tall, good looking, smart, all these things. So that's how we recruit, and that's how we advertise. My question is this newfangled sperm banking kind of the consumer preference satisfaction, as opposed to what Robert Graham, the founder of the Nobel Sperm Bank, says is the point? Is it really so different? Is it really so different at all from that earlier? I think the question is, if you take away the bigotry, you take away the overarching blueprint for what type of people you're trying to create, all people should be smart or tall or whatever, is there anything wrong with letting individuals try to choose the kind of baby that they want?
I could have went to a bar and just done what some people do, right? But nobody. I wanted to be responsible. If you're in a relationship and if you don't ask those questions, shame on you. if you're purchasing something and it was documented that you're getting this, and it turns out half of it is wrong, and it's not only just, oh, his eyes aren't blue. It's like, my gosh, it's genetic conditions that I may have passed on to my child. And that's shame on them.
What's okay to want in a child when you're in a position to try and choose? Just health? IQ and education? What about height or perfect pitch? At what point does it cross the line from just wanting the best for your future kid to designing a baby to suit your tastes? When you conceive a baby with a partner, it may not even occur to you that there are any discrete qualities you'd want to see in a child you might have together. But selecting someone to have a baby with takes on a very different feel when you're handed a catalog containing hundreds of detailed profiles. Donor 9623's is 26 pages of physical features, personality tests, and meticulous descriptions of every blood relative. How could this exhaustive inventory not inflate your sense of control over the genetic lottery? Give the illusion of greater influence than you really have over what your future kid will be like?
And then, of course, there's the issue that all this was self-reported with no checks or verification, reliable, background tests or anything else whatsoever. Does suing, you think, for getting a donor like this and not like that, does that give the impression that a parent's love is conditional on their child having particular traits? Or is that love rich enough to seek certain characteristics before your child is born or even conceived, even though you say, well, after my child comes to be, I love him or her because he or she is ours, whether or not they've got illness or other features that aren't ones that parents wished for or that they chose.
Your extracted eggs, Marie, have been fertilized with Antonio's sperm. You have specified hazel eyes, dark hair, and fair skin. I've taken the liberty of eradicating any potentially prejudicial conditions, premature baldness, myopia, alcoholism, and addictive susceptibility, propensity for violence, obesity, etc.
We didn't want, diseases, yes, but.
Right. We were just wondering if it's good to just leave a few things to chance.
You want to give your child the best possible start. Believe me, we have enough imperfection built in already.
Now, that was from the 1997 movie Gattaca, which at that time was crazy science fiction. Today, genetic testing companies advertise for this very kind of thing. Something called polygenic screening enables to test for not just single gene conditions, things like, or chromosomal abnormalities like Down syndrome or Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, but also for more complicated traits, things like height or weight or intellectual ability, and give lots of risk profiles for the combination of these various traits. And they're encouraging, just like this genetic counselor was in Gattaca, if you want to reproduce responsibly, then you're going to use whatever this technology is available to you, because otherwise you're just rolling the dice with the life of your kid. And you could have made your kid better off. They could be more happy, more successful, more healthy. Got just a couple more minutes, going to wrap up. Now, these technologies, even sperm bank, is not cheap. Whether you're selecting among donors or embryos, in the United States, it's not covered by insurance. We don't cover the costs for people who can't afford it, and it's a hefty fee. If only accordingly the wealthy can afford to screen for these diseases, let's just start at that, then things like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease might end up becoming proxies for class. That is, if you have a disease, say you have a baby with Down syndrome, that's a proxy that you don't have enough money to screen. Or maybe that you have certain religious principles that keep you from seeing the responsible, proper thing to do that's expected of you. There is no room in our moral appraisal of our neighbors for that chance, that fate, that nature. Even if, let's just say, universal health insurance coverage gave everyone an equal chance to choose their child's genetic start in life, might genetic adversity stop being seen as something that just could have happened to any of us? There but for the grace of God go I or my child, that inspire our sympathy and support, instead of something we brought on ourselves from our bad choices, and that we should be left according to deal with on our own. Again, not science fiction or speculation. After Denmark offered prenatal screening for Down syndrome free for every family, the number of kids born with that condition dropped so dramatically that it virtually disappeared across the whole of the population. Now, enforcing these kind of reproductive expectations is complicated. I think it's complicated in a couple of different ways. I think it risks closing us off to the diversity of human lives, helping us fail to appreciate the vulnerabilities that we all share. I wonder if we might lose a sense of collective responsibility for the disadvantaged, or miss the humility that parenthood teaches, however it is that our kids come to be. And of course, in this era where Roe is no more and reproductive freedom and choice is under attack, all this is balanced against the freedom that people have to plan their family lives for themselves, especially people who are at a reproductive disadvantage, who themselves alone bear the burdens of pregnancy, women, or who can't reproduce the way that other people find easy and need help that costs money. That's where I was going to leave things with some of the stakes. I thank you so much for your attention, and I'm so eager for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Fox. This was awesome. Right before we jump into questions, I just wanted to go ahead and share my screen for a quick information on our office. We have our LLM programs that we are offer through our graduate programs office here. We have several different LLMs in taxation, business and corporate law, a general one with concentrations. Not all of them are listed here. International law, and specifically for our international students coming from foreign law schools, we have our LLM in US law. You're able to set up a virtual meeting with me on the QR code if you want to talk about any programs. We also offer short courses. So any way you'd like to interact more with our office, also some contact information for us there. So I just wanted to share that with everyone, and I'm happy to jump into questions now if there are any. We can either in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand function as we are kicking off. Either text it in the chat or raise your hand. I will start with a question I've had from the beginning. Has there ever been a case of a woman's pregnancy issues being related back to a sperm donor incident? I'm not familiar with any case off the top of my head, but I was wondering if there's any, like, on the mother's side, health complications that have been related back to that same issue of not knowing what was given.
For the woman herself by virtue of being inseminated with a donor sperm?
Yes.
Ah, I don't know of any cases quite like that, but let me share a couple of related reflections. In a growing number of cases, these go by the name of fertility fraud. It's discovered that it was relatively common during the 1960s, 70s, 80s. This was before the rise of, cheap take-home DNA tests, where we really found it easier to connect people biologically, and the emergence of, donor sibling registries for people to connect through having a particular donor DNA they share in common. A lot of doctors were discovered to have used their own sperm to inseminate fertility patients, which is not what the parents expected or wanted or consented to. And so as a result, there were no pregnancy complications, but parents who thought that they were having a child related to the half the mother, half the father was going to raise that child, or from a donor that they selected, instead ended up with a child related to the doctor or a medical student that he had inseminate them while they were unconscious. So there are lots of those cases that the legal system is dealing with. That involves not negligence or recklessness, that is, with knowledge of a risk, just putting it aside and doing something you're not supposed to, and by not abiding by the good practice. It's instead, or what's the legal minimum that's expected of you in that role as medical professional or otherwise. This is intentional misconduct. This is a new class of cases that would involve things like birth control sabotage, or intentionally lying to a patient that their pregnancy is healthy when it turns out that the child has been diagnosed with a devastating condition in order to deceive her to carry her pregnancy to term. I will say in all those cases that wrongful birth doctrine bans even intentional misconduct, even deliberate lying to get an outcome that a doctor prefers instead of the freely chosen decision of a patient. One last thing I would mention is that in this case, a donor 9623, after the second season of the podcast, a court for the first time ever authorized a trial to proceed in this case. That is, more than just papers being sent, briefs being filed back and forth, witnesses, testimony, judge and jury. But ultimately, at the last minute, that was dismissed as a matter of law because it was shown that the mother herself had some potential issues in her background that again would complicate or confuse that tracing of causation from the donor as the wrongdoer, or the sperm bank for failing to uncover the truth about the donor, the easily verifiable or knowable risks that they declined to do what they ought to have done by way of verification. And they said, man, genetics is really complicated. You've got a couple of things in your background too. We just can't, connect it together. I haven't yet heard about a case like you were describing, Feline, where a pregnancy problem, but we do have the reverse, which is one of these other new reproductive technologies called mitochondrial replacement therapy. Takes a damaged egg that wouldn't otherwise be able to lead to a pregnancy or have one that's carried to term, and replaces it, the damaged DNA material, from a different woman's egg. This is, I think, kind of pejoratively or sensationalizing in a sensationalized way called three-parent babies. But it's really just taking some more healthy material from a third person and replacing a little bit with a woman. So, and with a woman's egg, the one who intends to carry and raise the child. Yeah, the closest thing I can think of to the case you're describing isn't usually related to reproductive misconduct. That is, cases in which, procreation is on the line, pregnancy, bearing children, childbirth, but rather cases in which intimate partners fail to disclose the fact of their AIDS diagnosis, um, or or they say, right? So we've been talking about cases in which people might lie about being sterilized, or say that they're on the birth control pill when they're not, or might poke holes in condoms, or in a number of cases, people smuggle the contents of condoms or of sperm in their mouth over to a sperm bank, or using a turkey baster to inseminate themselves, when the clear understanding between the partners was, we're using this way of having sex, oral, not vaginal. We're using the condom specifically to avoid the very reproduction that then was done. These cases involve people who were unknowingly, unwittingly infected with diseases. So that clearly can complicate pregnancy, fertility, in ways that if there's those are not genetic disorders that pass along to offspring. At least I guess AIDS would be both, but more the kinds of STDs that people would pass along to partners more frequently. And funnily enough, those are screened by the FDA, but nothing related to the reproduction. It's the only thing. The donors are vigorously screened just for STDs. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you. We have one question in the chat about religion. How does religion tie into this? It is already a touchy subject with artificial insemination as is, but with the choice, how does that raise issues?
Oh, it looms very, very large indeed. So first, let's talk about religious healthcare institutions. Catholic affiliated hospitals now control most of the beds, lots of the OBGYN practice in many parts of the country. There isn't another option for people who live, say within a 30-mile or minute radius for them to get to another place that's not a Catholic affiliated organization. That is Catholic affiliated. And that just doesn't mean that the Catholic Church owns the hospital or runs it. But even if there's like some merger, acquisition, some kind of connection, it means it's governed by Catholic bylaws, which say, indeed, as the questioner suggested, that IVF is not allowed. That is forbidden for people affiliated, for individual doctors and patients to offer it. So anything related to assisted reproduction, with a couple exceptions, is really off limits for people who go to a Catholic hospital, maybe one that they don't even know. Oftentimes they don't have Catholic names, or it's a public hospital, just happen to merge in ways that they don't know about. We'll find that they are not offered the chance for screening, for donor insemination, for in vitro fertilization. These things are off the table, but it goes beyond just Catholic institutions with rules about this. Now, after the fall of Roe v. Wade, the energy from among anti-abortion forces has really repositioned itself against assisted reproductive technologies and IVF, in vitro fertilization in particular. The goal being to recognize not just the end of abortion, but the recognition of unborn personhood across all dimensions and domains. This includes creating embryos for the purpose of having a child, but in ways that characteristically also results in the destruction of embryos that can't that won't be successful in a pregnancy, or just extras that would be parents screened in order to have ones that were healthy or didn't have the very genetic disorder that they were at risk of passing along to offspring. So now the largest religious organization in the whole country, the Southern Baptist Church, has made it for the first time in its history the official position. They've got so many followers as a constituency, a lot of influence in Congress. Their position is that IVF should be banned everywhere, not just Catholic hospitals, but across the country, a federal ban. And we might remember that in February 2024, about a year and a half after the Dobbs decision overruling Roe came down to the Supreme Court, the Alabama Supreme Court, in a case well, it's actually a case like this one, involving basically the negligent destruction embryos, IVF ones, because a lab failed to secure their facility, letting someone else wander in, take out a tray of frozen embryos, which gave them freezer burn, and it's minus 196 degrees Celsius in order to keep it cryo preserved, and then the contents were destroyed. The parents sued, but you've seen in what we've discussed that those suits are all but doomed to fail. The Alabama Supreme Court said, there's one other way that we might be able to grant relief to plaintiffs, which is through the doctrine of wrongful death. That is, call the embryos people and let surviving parents sue for the loss of their children as if a drunk driver had hit them. And so they assigned the status, at least for purposes of recovering survival for your lost children, to IVF embryos or lost embryos to children, or children who are killed, children who had already been born, they had a relationship with beyond fetal bonding. I mean, these embryos hadn't even been initiated a pregnancy yet. They were in the laboratory, in vitro. And so in this case, the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court cited at length, quoted from the Bible over and over, these long passages of the justification for his reason. So in all these ways, we see religion and qualms about assisted reproduction, things that, disconnect reproduction from sex, and allow reproduction without sex, just like abortion allowed sex without reproduction or birth control, as being a cause for fierce opposition, which would, I guess we've been complaining about reproduction gone awry, again, just for people who can pay for it. And I think that certain religious forces are arguing that we just shouldn't have any of these available in the first place, to go wrong or right. It just shouldn't be allowed. Right now, it's what makes the United States a really big hub for people all around the world who are seeking to find a surrogate, a gestational surrogate to carry a child, a donor, sperm or egg, because we have so few rules, such lax regulations, that you can, in the market economy that can drive prices down, but doesn't really compare with other countries that cover it as a matter of health insurance. You can get whatever you want here. And so that's why families come from all over the world. There are no restrictions currently on people who are gay or other sexual minorities or single people from accessing a sperm donor, for example. Not here, not yet. Which is a reason why we are a highly attractive destination for people, especially in countries where that's not allowed. Places, France, Austria, parts of Australia, kind of like highly developed countries that have sharp limits on who gets to access. And indeed, I think the influence of religion bears down to reduce access in the first place, let alone whether it goes right or wrong, just whether it's accessible, especially to sexual minorities and other marginalized people who are not approved of as the right kind of parents, whether that's wealthy, white, heterosexual, or otherwise.
Thank you so much. That was it from questions in the chat. I don't see any hands. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. If anyone wants to take your full class, come join us at USD. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
My great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.